Right now, folks, honestly, Aston Martin are quite delusional. They are the team that at the beginning of the season were the ones that could realistically go after Red Bull. Fernando Alonso was having the time of his life. The famous driver for just being at the right place but at the very wrong time had now bucked the trend. He was now in the pound seat for getting podium after podium after podium. His best season since he was back at Ferrari. They do have one driver, Aston Martin, that is quite convincing in regarding to their 5-year plan. Much more convincing than Sebastian Vettel was, but you gotta remember, Aston Martin are where they are right now because of Vettel's development and research and patience and stuff, so you gotta owe Seb a lot for what they're doing right now. But that second seat, Lance Stroll, oh dear. As part of this 5-year plan that Mike Crack has actually laid out, and is actually following quite well actually after a very dodgy 2022 where they kind of went backwards, it's not really the mission statement of Aston Martin to be a midfield team or a backmarker team anymore, where you can have one good driver and then one not so good driver, and you could just get points anyway because the very good driver will make up the odds. You can't really do that anymore, mate. If you look at the quali and race battles that were happening at Ferrari and Mercedes, they're relatively close. And that consistency and relatively close gap between the two drivers are the reasons why Mercedes and Ferrari are where they are in the constructors. Whereas Aston, they don't have that. You're going to say that in terms of the stats and the battles, Red Bull are kind of similar to Aston Martin, but come on, it's Red Bull. They're so dominant, does it really even matter if Max beats Checo? It's still relatively first and second at the end of the day. But with Aston Martin, they really need to get a better driver. Because Lance Stroll right now, I think he's checked out, and he's mainly being placed there for the fact that the boss is his father, and even he's starting to get tired of it. But let's just take a look at the pace. Has Lance Stroll actually improved in the time that Fernando Alonso has been around? Has Fernando Alonso's change of heart and more maturity and teamsmanship actually improved the Canadian driver? No. Absolutely not. This graph from the F1 creator over on Reddit, which looks spectacular by the way, shows the gap in terms of pace regarding Alonso and Stroll. You don't need me to tell you that this graph is quite telling. There are very few races where it's been really close, and you can tell that Stroll is kind of close to Alonso. Now, Spain, the fact that Stroll was faster, Alonso just went into the gravel and really damaged the floor of his car. And these days, if you damage the floor, like Lando did in Spa, where they were actually looking fairly good, it's really going to compromise the rest of your weekend. Stroll was barely faster than Alonso after that anyway, with a compromised car. Monaco, Canada, and Zandvoort, I mean, oh my goodness. I mean, it's just, that was really bad. But Mike Crack does seem to have an excuse time and time again. And the biggest excuse as to why Lance and Alonso are so different is that, oh, Lance's side of the paddock is not really pulling their weight. They really need to improve. The team really needs to improve. No, their driver really needs to improve. Alonso and his side of the garage are doing absolutely fine. Alonso is still able to get some points for them to try and hold on to 4th place in the Constructors, where they were 2nd in the Constructors not that long ago. Aston Martin have 217 points in the Constructors. Alonso has 170 of them. Lance Stroll, 47. A similar distribution to quite a lot of other teams that are more midfield teams, not top tier teams where they're much more relatively close and team orders do come into play more often. Carlos and Charles, they're relatively close, despite the fact that Ferrari really want to push the narrative that Charles is the golden boy and he's the better driver. Right now, it's not looking convincing. Even Russell and Hamilton are relatively close, even though this year it's been more towards Hamilton than Russell. But they are still two talented drivers who on their day can get very good results and double podiums, which is what Aston Martin really needs. They need more than just Alonso getting on the podium and just going, hey, look at me, I still got it. I mean, it would be great if my teammate was here. Oh, well, Aston Martin is completely washed anyway. They're nothing like they were at the beginning of the season. Well, there is a reason to that, because we're going back to the 5-year plan here, and so far, Aston Martin are really exceeding expectations, because remember Renault's 5-year plan back in 2016 to be back winning races in 2020? They didn't quite make that, but they were close with Daniel Ricciardo, and then he just left, and then they just decided to have a new 5-year plan with Alpine, and so far that plan is just absolutely going to pot. But 2023, the middle of this 5-year plan, Do you really expect them to be actually going for wins all the time throughout the entire season? No. Their brand new factory at Silverstone, the biggest investment that Team Silverstone has had in well over 20 years, since the Jordan days of the late 90s? I mean, wow. You can't really expect too much from them, it's only just come online. So I think you'll find much more gains in 2024. Aston Martin have simply run out of steam for this year. They have done spectacularly for what they've got right now. The fact that they are even being considered for the likes of the Big Three at the end of the season, even though it's looking more like maybe the Big Four, or I mean Big Five if McLaren pull their socks up. I mean, that's still something. They're at least convincingly in the hunt amongst the front runners instead of being well in the mid-pack. The fact that Alonso can get podiums right now in the first car that the Red Bull recruit Dan Fellows has fully developed and then can actually enhance upon in 2024, Aston Martin can really build from that. And I did a video in the previous incarnation of this channel regarding Aston Martin's place at the top table. The problem I saw with them was that, sure, their car is up there with the likes of Ferrari, Mercedes, and even Red Bull on some days, but their mindset is not quite there yet. Oh, we're really high up here. Let's best not take risks. Let's be careful. And Red Bull can just run rings around them. They have been at loggerheads with Mercedes for many years and know how to deal with pit strategies, pit stops. They know what to do when it comes to strategy, whereas Aston Martin don't. So they do have a car that can get some good results, but at the beginning of the season, it was still a little bit cautious. There are moments, especially in Miami, I believe, where they did make some very not risky calls at all, and it did compromise their race, and they didn't finish as high as they could have done. But they are slowly starting to learn the ethos of being a top-tier team at the moment. And the thing is, though, is that Lance Stroll does not have that. Yes, you might be able to think, well, 2020, he got some podiums, he got pole in Turkey. Okay, that's good, that's absolutely good, but that wasn't sustainable. And that was mainly down to the fact they did copy the 2019 Mercedes in quite a lot of ways. They did get a 15-point penalty for that, and they were really lucky to not be thrown out of the championship. So any driver would have actually done very well. In fact, Checo in Sakir got a win for them. That's how good that car was. So it's like the 2014 Williams. You just stick a Mercedes engine in there, and despite a really not optimal package in terms of downforce, that Williams car was going to be the third best car that year, guaranteed. Can you imagine if Williams had a really, really good car in terms of their downforce and the rest of that? They probably would have actually been quite convincing for second in the constructors. And maybe with Massa, they could have gotten a win or two, but we'll never know about that. Aston Martin are in a state of flux, of transformation, transcendency. Alonso is doing all of the heavy lifting with the media when it's becoming really clear. And a lot of you in the comments for yesterday's video really talked about this too, is that you nowadays as a driver have to be a brand. A brand which is marketable, could be profitable for the team, and is really good for your social media presence. Lance doesn't have that. I imagine that if Lance Stroll had been around maybe 10 years ago, you probably could have gotten away with not really talking to the media. Or you could have actually done the Kimi Räikkönen way of just not talking to the media, but making that your brand. And Kimi really didn't have to talk to anyone, but he could lean into that because, you know, basically, that's just me. I don't talk. Yeah. But Lance didn't really do into that. I can see why people might like him because, you know, go, oh, sweet, he's so shy, bless. But yeah, his performances are just not good. He just does not look like a driver who is capable of being in a title-challenging team. And it just seems that Mike Crack is making quite a lot of excuses and saying that, oh, it's the team's fault that Lance isn't doing so well. Really? You really think that the team would be letting Lance Stroll down? The person who is the son of the guy who's actually writing the checks? You think it would actually be the other way around. I think maybe that was at the beginning down to being careful around Fernando Alonso because he is a ball breaker when it comes to teams. He is notoriously well known for being like that, but we've seen none of that here. And Mike Crack has said so himself, that he's actually been quite open, transparent, more of a team player, wanting to build the team up and get them to where they are right now. Alonso has actually matured. We've actually now seen an Alonso who is more likely to look at the bigger picture, look at the team, and if you help out the team and you're, you know, diplomatic and you don't get angry with them, it actually leads to better results because everyone is happy. And now Team Silverstone is happier than ever. This is the first time since 1999 where they look genuinely like they could challenge the big guys. It could have been more had certain things not happened, and actually, Damon Hill, that year, ooh, he had checked out. Kind of like Lance in a way. The difference is that Lance isn't a jaded Formula One former world champion. No, he's just a guy who is the son of the boss. And a lot of people have been saying, well, when is he actually going to go? Well, we all thought that this year might actually be his last, but his contract is as long as a piece of string. It can go on for as long as you want it to. It is apparently confirmed that he will be in the seat for next year. But I feel like, okay, he survived 2023. It's all part of the 5-year plan. Aston Martin being 4th in the Constructors? That's great. Convincingly behind Ferrari and Mercedes, but by only a little. That is acceptable. I'm pretty sure there've been a lot of background mumblings amongst the shareholders about, well, we were second only maybe 6 months ago, and we are now putting tens of millions of dollars on the table at a time when Aston Martin is really restructuring itself and is burning through a lot of money. I'm pretty sure that Papa Stroll would not want to say goodbye to tens of millions of dollars, but they seemingly are willing to actually put up with it. If Lance Stroll cannot close the gap to Fernando Alonso and actually pull in some better results, even if it's just like, you know, more 5ths and 6ths, or maybe even 7ths, just being in the points consistently. Consistency is king. Even if you're not the best, if you can pick up some good bottom half of the top 10 results all the time, you can do well. That's all he needs to do. And then he can actually secure his future for as long as he wants. And then if he gets bored, he can then go to tennis. And then the press junkets of Aston Martin can say, well, Lance gave it a go, this racing thing, but he's decided to move on. He's still young. He can go and do other things. Yeah, tennis has been his other passion. We didn't want to stand in the way of his passion and wish him the best of luck for what he chooses to do in the pro tennis circuit. If Aston Martin actually keep Lance and things don't change and Lance does not improve, then you can't really take Aston Martin's aspirations of being a title-challenging team seriously at all. It's going to be just this one driver who is in his 40s but is still putting in the results and is doing a pretty good job for them, and then this other guy who's really kind of dragging the team down and, once again, putting tens of millions of dollars on the table for all of the other teams to partake from. This is just the point. Aston Martin, in a way, are still thinking like they're a midfield team where that kind of stuff you can get away with. You can rely on one solid, consistent driver, and then the other driver, they might have their day every now and again, but, you know, okay, you don't really have to think about that. You'd be just lucky that one driver is doing well. When you're fighting for the title, you need both drivers to be up there. That's why, on many championship standings, you see the top 3 teams taking up the top 7 or 8 places. Lance, he's lucky to be in the top 10 right now. And if Oscar Piastri or Pierre Gasly or Ocon, they get their act together, they can have Lance being pushed down into the bottom 10. For Aston Martin, who have been really good at transforming themselves. This is the point. Lance is just not interested. And it's really getting on my nerves because Aston, I want them to do well. I want them to win. This is a place where they can actually have a really big upset and change the status quo, where it's been Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari. I want them and McLaren, Aston, to just change things, disrupt things, have different teams being at the top. That's why I'm looking forward to Audi coming in 2026. They have the capital to make it work. Andretti, if they are very, very serious and Formula One actually lets them compete because the FIA are looking quite likely to actually approve them quite easily, then we might see that. We could see a completely different Formula One in a couple of years. And I want Aston to be part of that. But they're not going to be part of that if they're just going to indulge Lance Stroll. Seriously, he's just not cut out for it. And I know he did injure himself and he was really, really good in that Bahrain race because I just thought, well, credit where credit's due here. You had a really bad injury and you came back and scored some very good points there. Well done. I will give Lance credit where credit is due, but that's becoming rarer and rarer by the race because he's just falling into the back. And last in qualifying at Monza, even though he didn't really get that much time, he has shown that Monza is actually a pretty good track for him because he was 4th place in 2020. He does know how to race there. I wouldn't really invest that much time in him if I were the team boss of Aston Martin. But if you'd like to know who I think might be a good alternative to Lance Stroll, you can watch this video next. See you there.